Have you ever wondered why some people walked out of your life right before they could destroy it? What if the rejection that broke your heart was actually heaven's protection? Stay until the end, because the final sign is the one most people misunderstand. And recognizing it could completely change the way you see every difficult season you endure. And one of the clearest signs that a woman is being protected by God from evil people is when doors begin to close that she desperately wanted to walk through. At first, those moments rarely feel like protection. They feel like heartbreak. They feel like disappointment. They feel like unanswered prayers echoing through silent nights. You may have invested your time, your emotions, your faith, and your hopes into a relationship, a friendship, a business opportunity, or a dream that suddenly collapsed without warning. You prayed sincerely, believed faithfully, and expected everything to unfold according to your plans, only to watch it disappear before your eyes. In those moments, it is easy to believe that God has forgotten you, or that He is withholding something good from your life. But heaven often works in ways that challenge human understanding. What appears to be rejection on earth may actually be divine redirection from above. God sees beyond appearances. He knows what is hidden behind charming words, polished smiles, and attractive opportunities. While you can only judge by what is visible, God sees motives that have not yet revealed themselves, conversations that have not yet happened, betrayals that have not yet unfolded, and consequences that have not yet arrived. His protection begins long before the danger becomes obvious. There are people who enter your life looking like answers to your prayers, but beneath the surface they carry intentions that would slowly drain your peace, weaken your faith, and distract you from your purpose. Evil is rarely obvious in the beginning. It often disguises itself as kindness, affection, opportunity, or success. That is why discernment is such a precious gift from God. Yet even when our discernment is not strong enough to recognize hidden danger, God's protection never depends entirely on our ability to see clearly. His wisdom reaches further than our understanding. He can close a door that your emotions desperately want to open because His love refuses to allow your future to be destroyed by something that only looks good in the present. There are relationships that seem perfect during the first few months but eventually become controlling, manipulative, or spiritually destructive. There are friendships that begin with loyalty but slowly fill your heart with jealousy, gossip, and compromise. There are career opportunities that promise financial gain while quietly demanding the sacrifice of your integrity, your family, or your relationship with God. If every attractive door opened simply because you desired it, you could easily walk into situations that would take years to recover from. Sometimes the greatest miracle is not the opportunity God gives you, but the opportunity He to look. Most great refuses to let you have. Think about how often people look back on painful experiences and finally understand why God said no. A woman may mourn the end of a relationship, only to discover later that the person she loved was living a double life. She may grieve over losing a job, only to find out that the company collapsed under corruption or financial disaster. She may feel devastated because someone rejected her, only to realize years later that accepting that relationship would have led her away from the purpose God had prepared. Time has a remarkable way of exposing what emotions once concealed. What seemed unfair in one season often becomes a testimony of God's faithfulness in another. The pain of a closed door usually lasts for a moment, but the protection it provides can preserve an entire lifetime. That is why spiritual maturity learns to trust God's decisions even before understanding His reasons. Faith is not simply believing that God can open doors. Faith is also believing that every door He closes carries wisdom that will eventually be revealed. The enemy often convinces people that every closed door is proof that God has abandoned them. He whispers thoughts of failure, insignificance, and hopelessness. He encourages comparison by making you believe that everyone else is moving forward while you remain stuck. But comparison hides an important truth. You cannot compare your visible delay with someone else's invisible danger. A path that appears successful today may lead to destruction tomorrow. A relationship that seems perfect from the outside may be filled with fear, manipulation, and emotional pain behind closed doors. God is never pressured by appearances because He knows the full story before it unfolds. He is not trying to make your journey harder. He is trying to keep your journey holy, purposeful, and safe. His perspective stretches far beyond the present moment, protecting not only your current peace, but also your future calling, your spiritual growth, and the generations that may one day be influenced by your obedience. Every time God blocks a path that would have compromised your destiny, He is declaring that your purpose is too valuable to be handed over to people whose intentions are rooted in selfishness, deception, or evil. Another powerful sign that a woman is being protected by God from evil people is the growing gift of discernment that cannot be explained by logic alone. There are moments when everything about a person seems right on the surface. Their words are polished, their personality is charming, and their actions appear kind. Everyone around you may admire them, encourage the connection, or even question why you seem hesitant. Yet deep within your spirit, there is an unshakable feeling that something is not right. You cannot always explain it with facts. You cannot point to obvious evidence. You simply know that your peace begins to disappear whenever that person comes close. The world often dismisses these moments as overthinking, anxiety, or unnecessary suspicion. But there is a difference between fear and spiritual discernment. Fear is rooted in insecurity and imagines danger where there may be none. Discernment, however, is rooted in God's wisdom. It is the quiet voice that gently warns before destruction arrives. It is the inner conviction that refuses to be silenced even when circumstances appear completely normal. God does not always reveal the entire picture, because if He did, faith would no longer be necessary. Instead, He often gives just enough understanding to keep His children from walking into situations that would eventually harm them. A woman who is protected by God begins to value that inner prompting more than outward appearances, because she learns that heaven sees what human eyes cannot. Discernment becomes especially important because evil people rarely introduce themselves as enemies. They often arrive carrying compliments instead of criticism, promises instead of threats, and smiles instead of anger. They know how to create trust before revealing manipulation. They know how to mirror your values, speak your language, and gain your confidence. Some people study your kindness only so they can exploit it later. Others recognize your generosity and mistake it for weakness. There are individuals who enter your life not because they celebrate your purpose, but because they hope to benefit from your gifts, your influence, or your compassion. This is why appearances can never become the foundation of wise decisions. God understands that deception works best when it is wrapped in beauty, charisma, and familiarity. That is why He places spiritual alarms within the hearts of those who seek Him. You may find yourself becoming uncomfortable during conversations that everyone else seems to enjoy. You may notice inconsistencies that others overlook. You may sense hidden pride beneath false humility or selfish ambition beneath generous words. These moments are not always dramatic. Sometimes they are almost impossible to describe. Yet they continue growing stronger each time you ignore them. God is not trying to make you suspicious of everyone around you. He is teaching you to recognize the difference between what merely looks good and what is truly good according to His wisdom. Many women spend years regretting the times they ignored that quiet voice within. Looking back, they remember thinking, something didn't feel right from the beginning. They remember the small moments they dismissed because they wanted the relationship to progress, the friendship to last, or the opportunity to become everything they had hoped for. They overlooked dishonesty because the person apologized convincingly. They excused manipulation because they believed love required endless tolerance. They ignored repeated warnings because they feared being alone more than they feared making the wrong choice. Over time, what began as a whisper became undeniable evidence. Hidden motives surfaced. Character flaws became impossible to ignore. Trust was broken. Peace disappeared. The pain they experienced was not always caused by a lack of intelligence, but by choosing visible emotions over invisible wisdom. God's protection often begins with small impressions that seem insignificant until the truth. Finally comes to light those gentle nudges, restless feelings, and moments of hesitation are sometimes acts of divine mercy, giving you the opportunity to step away before deeper wounds are formed. Spiritual discernment grows stronger each time you honor it, instead of silencing it to satisfy other people's expectations or your own emotional desires. As a woman continues walking closely with God, her discernment begins to mature beyond first impressions and emotional reactions. She no longer measures people only by their words. And while character is revealed over time, she pays attention to patterns instead of promises, consistency instead of charisma, humility instead of performance, and integrity instead of popularity. She understands that someone may know how to quote truth without living it, may know how to appear generous while secretly pursuing selfish gain, or may know how to display affection while quietly controlling those around them. This growing wisdom is not meant to isolate her from healthy relationships, but to protect the calling God has placed upon her life. Every moment of discernment becomes another reminder that the God who sees every hidden intention is faithfully guiding each step, quietly steering her away from people whose influence would slowly erode her peace, compromise her convictions, weaken her confidence, and pull her heart away from the purpose He lovingly designed for her long before she ever recognized the dangers herself. One of the most remarkable signs that a woman is protected by God from evil people is the presence of a peace that cannot be explained by her circumstances. This is not the kind of peace that comes because everything is going well or because every problem has disappeared. It is a deeper peace, one that remains steady even when life around her seems uncertain, confusing, or filled with conflict. There may be people spreading rumors, creating unnecessary drama, questioning her character, or attempting to pull her into arguments that never seem to end. From the outside, it may appear that she has every reason to be anxious, angry, or overwhelmed. Yet instead of being consumed by fear, there is a quiet confidence resting within her spirit. That peace is not something she manufactured through positive thinking or emotional strength alone. It is evidence that God is guarding her heart in ways that cannot be measured by human. Understanding evil people often thrive on confusion because confusion clouds judgment. They know that if they can keep someone emotionally exhausted, constantly offended, or endlessly distracted, they can weaken that person's ability to make wise decisions. But when God places His peace over someone's life, He interrupts that strategy. He refuses to allow chaos to become the controlling voice in the heart of the woman who trusts Him. While others assume she should be consumed by bitterness, she discovers an unexpected ability to remain composed. This kind of peace is not denial of reality. It is confidence that God's reality is greater than every visible circumstance. There are seasons when evil people intentionally create storms because they hope your emotions will become your greatest weakness. They may criticize you unfairly, manipulate situations to make you appear guilty, twist your words, or try to isolate you from people who genuinely care about you. Their goal is often larger than simply hurting your feelings. They want to disturb your inner stability. They understand that once peace disappears, fear usually takes its place. And fearful people often make desperate decisions. That is why they provoke, accuse, and pressure, hoping you will respond impulsively instead of wisely. Yet God's protection frequently appears through the supernatural ability to remain emotionally anchored when everyone expects you to fall apart. Instead of reacting immediately, you feel compelled to pause. Instead of seeking revenge, you find yourself praying for wisdom. Instead of chasing after every misunderstanding to defend yourself, you begin trusting that God is fully capable of revealing the truth in His own time. This does not mean the pain disappears or that betrayal becomes easy to endure. It means that God's presence becomes greater than the pressure surrounding you. His peace quietly reminds you that you are not fighting your battles alone. And because of that assurance, the chaos loses much of its power to control your thoughts and emotions. Many women mistakenly believe that if they are truly protected by God, they will never experience conflict, rejection, or opposition. Yet throughout life, some of the greatest moments of spiritual growth occur in the middle of a conflict. Difficult circumstances rather than outside of them. Protection does not always mean God removes every storm. Sometimes His protection is revealed by giving you the strength to remain steady while the storm rages around you. Imagine standing in the center of powerful winds while remaining firmly rooted because your foundation cannot be shaken. That is what God's peace accomplishes. It prevents external pressure from becoming internal destruction. You may lose opportunities, relationships, or the approval of certain people, but you do not lose your identity. You may experience disappointment, but you do not surrender your hope. You may hear false accusations, but they do not redefine your worth, because your value is established by God rather than by human opinion. This inner stability frustrates evil people because they often expect emotional reactions that validate their attempts to create disorder. When they discover that your peace cannot be stolen by gossip, intimidation, manipulation, or hostility, they lose one of the greatest sources of influence they hope to gain over your life. The peace God gives also becomes a form of spiritual direction. There are moments when you pray about an opportunity, a relationship, or a major decision, and everything appears perfect according to human reasoning. The numbers make sense. The timing seems ideal. The people involved say all the right things. Yet despite every logical reason to move forward, your peace quietly begins to disappear. Restlessness replaces confidence. The excitement you once felt becomes increasingly difficult to hold on to. You cannot explain it to everyone around you because nothing obvious appears wrong, but your spirit recognizes what your eyes cannot yet see. On the other hand, there are times when a path looks challenging, uncertain, and even frightening, yet deep within your heart, there is an undeniable calm that refuses to leave. That peace becomes one of God's most faithful guides, gently leading you away from hidden danger and toward His will, with quiet assurance that does not depend on favorable circumstances, popular opinions, outward success, or the approval of people whose intentions were never aligned with His purpose for your life in the first place. One of the most difficult signs to recognize when God is protecting a woman from evil people is the season of separation that often comes before a season of elevation. Very few people celebrate being separated from relationships they once treasured, friendships they invested years into, or environments that once felt familiar and secure. In the moment, separation feels painful because it forces you to release what has become comfortable. It may seem as though people are suddenly distancing themselves from you without explanation. Invitations become less frequent. Conversations grow colder. Relationships that once seemed unbreakable quietly begin to fade. You may wonder if you have done something wrong or question whether you have somehow failed. Yet not every separation is a punishment, and not every ending is evidence of rejection. Sometimes God begins removing people from your life because they cannot go where He is taking you. There are individuals who were assigned to one chapter of your journey, but were never meant to accompany you into the next. If they remained, they would become obstacles instead of companions. God understands what every relationship will eventually produce long before you experience its outcome. He knows whether someone's influence will strengthen your faith or slowly weaken it. He knows who will encourage your purpose and who will quietly compete with it. He knows who celebrates your growth and who secretly resents it. Because His vision extends beyond the present, He often begins the work of separation before you fully understand the reason behind it. There are people who are comfortable with you as long as you remain the version of yourself that benefits them. They enjoy your generosity but not your boundaries. They appreciate your kindness but become uncomfortable when you begin walking in greater wisdom. They applaud your dreams only when those dreams do not challenge their own insecurities. The moment God starts transforming your life, exposing unhealthy patterns, and calling you into greater purpose, these relationships often begin to change. Some people who once encouraged you suddenly become critical. Others withdraw their support without explanation. Still others attempt to convince you to remain where you have outgrown because your growth exposes their unwillingness to change. This can be deeply confusing because you remember the history you shared and the loyalty you once believed existed. Yet growth has a way of revealing hearts. When God elevates someone spiritually, emotionally, or even professionally, hidden motives often become visible. Those who genuinely love you rejoice in your progress. Those driven by envy, control, or selfish ambition progress. You're driven by envy, control, or selfish ambition they once prayed you would receive. God sees these hidden responses long before they fully develop, and His protection sometimes comes through allowing distance to grow where closeness would eventually become harmful. What feels like loneliness today may actually be the space God is creating so your future will not be limited by people who cannot celebrate the calling He has placed upon your life. Separation also serves another purpose that is often overlooked. God is not only removing certain people from your life, He is removing their influence from your thinking. Every relationship shapes the way you see yourself, your future, and your relationship with God. If you remain surrounded by voices filled with fear, negativity, compromise, or constant criticism, those voices eventually begin to sound normal. Without realizing it, you start lowering your expectations, doubting your abilities, and questioning the very promises God placed within your heart. This is why some separations feel so uncomfortable. God is not simply changing your surroundings, He is renewing your perspective. He is teaching you to depend more on His voice than on the approval of people. During these seasons, silence often replaces constant conversation. Solitude replaces crowded schedules. Reflection replaces endless distraction. Although these moments can feel empty at first, they create room for spiritual clarity that would have been impossible if every unhealthy influence had remained. The absence of certain people is not always a sign that something valuable has been lost. Sometimes it is proof that God is making space for healthier relationships, wiser counsel, stronger faith, and greater opportunities that require a heart no longer attached to what would have held it back. Many women later discover that the people they grieved over losing were actually delaying the very blessings they had been praying to receive. Looking back, they realized that had those relationships remained intact, they might never have developed the courage to pursue their calling, establish healthy boundaries, or trust God completely. What once felt like abandonment becomes evidence of divine preparation. Every painful goodbye becomes part of a greater story that God was writing all along. Elevation requires freedom, and freedom often begins with separation. A bird cannot soar while tied to unnecessary weight, and a woman cannot fully embrace God's God. Purpose while carrying relationships that continually pull her toward fear, compromise, resentment, or spiritual exhaustion. The God who lovingly shapes every season understands that before he entrusts someone with greater influence, greater responsibility, and greater blessings, he must first clear away every connection that would quietly oppose the work he is preparing to accomplish through her life, her faith, her character, and her unwavering obedience to his direction, even when the path ahead remains hidden from view. Another unmistakable sign that a woman is being protected by God from evil people is that instead of being destroyed by opposition, she becomes stronger because of it. This truth is difficult to embrace because no one naturally enjoys criticism, betrayal, rejection, or false accusations. Every human heart longs to be understood, appreciated, and treated with fairness. When people deliberately misunderstand your intentions, question your integrity, or speak against your character, the emotional pain can feel overwhelming. It is easy to wonder why God would allow such opposition if he is truly protecting you. Yet divine protection does not always mean the absence of attacks. Very often, it means that every attack loses its power to accomplish the destruction it intended. Evil people may attempt to discourage you, but instead they unknowingly strengthen your dependence on God. They may try to isolate you, but in that isolation you discover a deeper relationship with the Sharer, one who never leaves your side. They may hope to break your confidence, but instead, you begin finding your identity in God rather than in the approval of others. What was designed to weaken you becomes the very process through which God builds greater endurance, greater wisdom, and greater spiritual maturity. Protection is not always seen in the battles that never happen. Sometimes it is revealed in the fact that the battles you survive leave you stronger than you were before they began. Opposition has a remarkable way of exposing what comfort often hides. During peaceful seasons, it is easy to believe that your faith is strong because nothing is challenging it, but when criticism increases, when relationships become strained, and when people unexpectedly turn against you, the true condition of your heart begins to emerge. God, in his wisdom, often allows these moments not to harm you, but to reveal the areas where he desires to make you stronger. Fear is replaced with courage. Dependence on people is replaced with dependence on Him. Emotional reactions slowly give way to spiritual wisdom. A woman who has walked through seasons of opposition with God begins responding differently than she once did. She no longer feels the need to defend herself against every accusation because she trusts that truth has a way of revealing itself over time. She becomes slower to react in anger because she understands that not every battle deserves her attention. She learns that silence can sometimes speak more powerfully than endless arguments. Evil people often expect immediate emotional reactions because emotional reactions are easier to manipulate. But when God's wisdom governs your responses instead of wounded emotions, their strategies begin to lose their effectiveness. They may continue speaking against you, but they cannot control your peace. They may attempt to provoke you, but they cannot dictate your character. The strength God develops within you becomes a shield that protects your heart from being shaped by the very hostility intended to destroy it. There are seasons when the attacks become so persistent that you begin questioning your purpose. You may ask yourself why life seems more difficult the closer you grow to God. You may wonder why opposition appears to increase precisely when you are striving to live with integrity, kindness, and obedience. Yet history repeatedly shows that people who carry meaningful purpose often encounter greater resistance than those who simply follow the crowd. Evil is rarely threatened by lives that remain spiritually stagnant. But it often opposes those whose faith, character, and influence have the potential to inspire others. This does not mean every hardship is a direct attack. Nor does it mean every disagreement is evidence of spiritual warfare. However, when a woman consistently chooses truth over compromise, forgiveness over bitterness, and obedience over convenience, she should not be surprised if some people become uncomfortable with the light she carries. Darkness naturally resists light because light exposes what darkness seeks to hide. The criticism may become louder, the misunderstandings more frequent, and the pressure more intense. Yet God's protection ensures that none of these forces can indeed cancel the purpose He has established for her life. Instead of allowing opposition to define her future, He transforms every difficult season into another opportunity for deeper faith. Perhaps one of the greatest miracles of God's protection is that He changes not only the deacon, but also the person within her. The woman who once feared rejection begins walking with quiet confidence. The woman who once depended on constant approval begins finding security in God's acceptance. The woman who once avoided difficult situations at all costs develops the courage to stand firmly for what is right, even when standing alone. She discovers that every painful experience has refined her character instead of ruining it. Every betrayal has taught her the value of wisdom. Every disappointment has deepened her trust in God's timing. Every obstacle has strengthened muscles of faith that comfort alone could never have developed. Looking back, she realizes that the opposition she once begged God to remove became one of the instruments He used to prepare her for responsibilities, relationships, opportunities, and assignments that required a level of spiritual strength, emotional maturity, steadfast perseverance, humble dependence upon Him, and unshakable faith that could only be formed through trials she never would have chosen for herself. The sixth sign that a woman is being protected by God from evil people is her growing confidence. That time eventually uncovers what deception tries to keep hidden. What deception tries to keep hidden. One of the greatest struggles in life is accepting that truth does not always appear immediately. There are moments when dishonest people seem to succeed while those who choose integrity appear to suffer. Lies spread quickly, misunderstandings take root, and false appearances can convince many people that evil is actually good. During these seasons, it is tempting to believe that justice has been forgotten, or that God has remained silent while deception continues unchecked. Yet God's silence should never be mistaken for His absence. He is never unaware of hidden motives, secret conversations, or carefully planned manipulation. He sees every intention long before it becomes visible to anyone else. While human beings often demand immediate answers, God frequently allows time to become the instrument that exposes what could not be proven in a single moment. A woman who is protected by him gradually learns not to panic when the truth seems delayed, because she understands that what is hidden from people is never hidden from God. She realizes that heaven operates according to perfect wisdom rather than human urgency. And because of that, she becomes less anxious about proving herself and more committed to remaining faithful even when circumstances appear unfair. There are people who are highly skilled at presenting an image that hides their true character. They know how to speak with confidence, earn trust quickly, and create impressions that make others admire them. Some can manipulate situations so effectively that the innocent appear guilty, while the fearful, guilty, appear innocent. This can be deeply painful for someone who values honesty, because it feels as though deception is winning. You may find yourself questioning why God allows such people to continue influencing others without immediate consequences. You may wonder why your integrity is being questioned, while those with selfish intentions continue receiving praise. Yet God often allows character to reveal itself over time, rather than through instant exposure. Character cannot remain hidden forever, because every heart eventually produces fruit, consistent with what it truly contains. Pride eventually speaks too loudly. Manipulation eventually becomes impossible to disguise. Selfish ambition eventually creates conflict. Dishonesty eventually contradicts itself. The mask that seemed so convincing at first begins to crack under the weight of repeated choices. What once looked impressive slowly loses credibility as patterns become impossible to self-ignore. Meanwhile, the woman who remains committed to truth, humility, and faithfulness discovers that consistency quietly builds a reputation that no false accusation can permanently destroy. She does not need to manufacture her own vindication, because God allows time to reveal what words alone never could. This understanding changes the way she responds to betrayal and injustice. Instead of exhausting herself trying to expose every lie or defend herself against everyday criticism, she begins trusting God's process. That does not mean she becomes passive or ignores wisdom when action is necessary. There are situations where healthy boundaries, honest conversations, or appropriate accountability are important. However, she no longer believes that her future depends on winning every argument or convincing every person of her innocence. She recognizes that some people have already decided what they want to believe, regardless of the evidence placed before them. Chasing their approval only drains emotional energy that could be invested in fulfilling God's purpose. Instead, she focuses on living with integrity day after day, allowing her actions to speak more loudly than accusations. This quiet confidence frustrates evil people because many of them expect constant reactions. They hope to keep her distracted by endless conflict, pulling her into cycles of defense, resentment, and emotional exhaustion. But God's protection gives her the wisdom to recognize that not every accusation deserves a response. Sometimes the strongest testimony is a life that continues reflecting truth while patiently allowing God to uncover what has been concealed. As the years pass, she begins noticing something remarkable. Many of the situations that once caused sleepless nights eventually make sense. The friendship that ended unexpectedly later reveals hidden jealousy. The opportunity that slipped away turns out to have been filled with corruption. The relationship she mourned would have led her into compromise instead of peace. The criticism that once wounded her becomes insignificant after people's friends' true motives are finally exposed. Looking back, she sees a pattern woven throughout her journey. God was never delaying because he had forgotten her, was never delaying because he had forgotten her. He was protecting her while preparing the right moment for truth to emerge. His timing preserved her from making decisions based solely on temporary emotions or incomplete information. Every season of waiting refined her patience, strengthened her faith, and taught her to trust his wisdom above her own understanding. She no longer measures God's faithfulness by how quickly answers arrive because she has witnessed too many moments where delayed understanding eventually became undeniable. Evidence of divine protection, perfect justice, unfailing wisdom, and a love that quietly guarded every step of her journey long before she ever recognized the dangers that had been moved from her path.